I'm saying welcome again. What we're going to do today, with all three of us are volunteers that work in the library. You might see us sometime behind the desk. So, and we also all like to read. So we are going to talk about this book with you today. Diane's going to do an introduction to the author for us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about his earlier books, which he's only had two others, so that won't be a long thing. Mitch is going to help us with some background from his own experience a little bit. And then we will have some questions for discussion. We've got 7 questions picked out. That's too many. We may not cover them all. If something doesn't sound interesting to you, say pass. And some of you may have questions you want to bring up. So we'll make this fluid as we go along. Okay. Diane.
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not sure it's on. It doesn't sound like
It is. You're on.
You're on. You can hear your mouth.
Okay. Oh, that. Okay. Amor Charles was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1964. Okay. I just read something the other day about where his name comes from. He did say in one of his many speeches, he's always on a YouTube or on a TV show. He wants to talk just as much as he likes to write. He said he comes from a long line of Puritans, and they often had names like Prudence and Chastity and Charity and Amor. So that's where his name comes from.
Can y'all hear her?
Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I have a tendency to move around.
I was told, kiss the mic and then we'll hear you. All right? It's only kissing it. Keep it up.
Just keep, yeah,
That's it,
keep
yeah.
kissing it. Okay. That seems strange, anyway. Okay, so he was born in Massachusetts, 1964. He was an avid reader and writer from the time he was about 6 years old. And I'm not sure what he was writing, but he did write a note once and put it in a bottle and put it in the Atlantic Ocean. And this is when he was about 10 years old. And about 3 weeks later, he got a response. He put his address on. He said it wasn't an SOS. It was just, please get in touch with me, when you get this. And it was Harrison Salisbury. Now, Harrison Salisbury was the managing editor of the New York Times at that time. And he also is a prolific author himself. They corresponded over the years. And when Amor was 18, he met Harrison, and so they, had a relationship of sorts through the years. He did go to prep school in the Boston area. He graduated from Yale University, and he got a master's in English from Stanford University. Now, while he was in college, Peter Matheson was a mentor of his. Peter Matheson was a pretty well-known author at that time. He wrote a lot of nature books and environmental books. He won the National Book Award twice, once for fiction and once for nonfiction. And he really cultivated Amor's writing. He felt he would be a very good novelist, so he, they did have a very long-time relationship, and that is one of, helped develop his interest in writing. So after he got his master's, he went to New York City thinking he would start his writing career. Well, he was broke, so he needed a job, and a friend of his was starting an investment firm, so he offered Amor a job. So he was with that firm for 20 years. The first 10 years, he didn't even write at all. He said it was the only time of his life he did not write. And then Matheson, his longtime mentor, said, well, once you go on Wall Street, you'll never leave, so your writing is over. But about 10 years in, he decided to pick up his ideas again. He kept all his ideas in notebooks, and over a period of time, a year or so, he published Rules of Civility, and this is while he was still in the investment firm. Well, that was so successful that he was able to leave his job and start writing full time. So, of course, that came out in 2011, and then that was followed by A Gentleman in Moscow, which was 2016. And all of them were on the New York Times bestseller list. He did get a prize for, the Kirkus Prize for Fiction in 2016 for Gentleman in Moscow. About a year ago, October 5th, 2021, The Lincoln Highway was published. And he didn't expect The Lincoln Highway to be as successful as his other books. Well, it has been. Book groups, many book groups have used it. He's has become a good friend of Jenna, so he's part of, Jenna has, she said, I got him before Oprah. So he'll be with Jenna, I guess, with his next book too. He lives in Gramercy Park now in New York City, but he often does his writing in upstate New York, where he has a large house on the lake. And he bought this house. He was looking for a place, and he fell in love with this house. It reminded him of the hunting lodge that's depicted in Rules of Civility, and also in The Lincoln Highway. So that's his home, and that's where he does a lot of his writing right now. Okay, married to Maggie, 2 teenage children right now. Now, we're going to talk a bit about his process. He does put all his ideas in notebooks. So as he comes up with an idea, he said his idea for Gentleman in Moscow, he said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to write about someone that's imprisoned in a hotel? And he said, next thing I knew, I was thinking about a hotel in Russia. So, as the ideas came, he would put them in notebooks. And when he had a pretty good idea of what he's going to write about, he would sit down and spend a whole year doing an outline. And he said, he's only written 3 books, but each time it takes about a year to do. And then after that, he does a rough draft. Now, when he's finished with his rough draft, at least in 2 of his books, I don't know about Rules of Civility, he does what he calls applied research. So after Gentleman in Moscow was in the rough draft form, he flew to Moscow, and he stayed at the Metropole Hotel for 2 weeks. Now, I think that's why we got all those fantastic details about that hotel. I mean, he lived there, he learned about it, and so that's what he calls applied research. And then, when he came to the Lincoln Highway, he picked up and flew to Nebraska, rented a car, and he drove the Lincoln Highway back to New York City. So that gave him, more ideas for finishing up his rough draft. There was something else. The little connections between his books. In The Lincoln Highway, we find out that this book ends July 21st, 1954. Well, that's the exact date that Gentleman in Moscow ends. And he said he even had it figured out with the time changed exactly the same time those 2 books end. So I think he loves to make these very subtle little connections between his books. And also, if you notice, Woolley in Lincoln Highway is a nephew of the Wolcott that's in Rules of Civility. And, there's no mention of that or of the uncle, but, well, there is. And also the hunting lodge is in both books. And that is, I think, kind of an interesting thing. And there's probably a lot of other subtle little connections between his books, and we'll find more as he goes along. I just read recently that he has, in March of this year, he decided on his next book. And he is now writing a book that starts in Cairo, Egypt in 1940 and ends in New York City in 1999. So maybe in about 3 years, we'll see what that's all about. And maybe there'll be a connection between that and one of these other books. And I think I might have left out a few things. I think that's about it. Okay.
I did read that the hunting lodge or country estate or whatever you want to call it, was where he and his family, his wife, children, and a nephew lived during the pandemic. He got out of New York City and lived there, and he was finishing, I guess, the Lincoln Highway. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about these books. I was in a book club. I've been in quite a few book clubs over the years. But I was in a book in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was living, and somehow I found this book. I don't remember if I read a review about it, or I must have. Since I was a librarian, I did read book reviews. I picked it for a book club I was in, and we all enjoyed it very much. I thought his writing was really nice. And his novels, Rules of Civility and Gentleman in Moscow, have collectively sold more than 4 million copies and have been translated into over 30 languages. And he's also had short stories in Paris Review, Granta, British Vogue, and Audible Origins. But one thing about Rules of Civility is that it's 369 pages. And then A Gentleman in Moscow is 462, and Gentleman in Moscow's 500 and something. So I just hope he doesn't go up another 20% for his next book, because I might be scared off. Rules of Civility, as Diane mentioned, was published in 2011. It was a New York Times bestseller also. The French translation received the 2012 Prix Fitzgerald Award. The title comes from a list of rules that George Washington wrote out for himself at the age of 14, Rules of Civility, how to lead a good life. It takes place over 1 year, in 1938. The U.S. is coming out of the Great Depression, not yet active participant in World War II. It follows several characters as they make decisions that create transitions in their life. But it seems like every book there's something, some phrase that really catches my ear. And this one with this character, Katie, she's traveling by cab and she's watching the Broadway lights. And this is the part in quotes: slipping by the windows like a string of lights being pulled off of a Christmas tree. And then he goes to another scene where he sees limousines idling in front of the 21 Club, smoke spiraling out of their tailpipes like genies from a bottle. He just has these things that give you these pictures that I just really love. So then when it came up here, and we were talking for some book clubs here about A Gentleman in Moscow, I think I was kind of put off by the picture. I didn't know if this was about a spy or what. And the book looked kind of big, and I wasn't drawing the connection that it was the same author I had read with Rules of Civility 5 years before, or 6 years before. And I tried reading it once, and I couldn't get into it, and I put it aside. But then one of my book clubs said they were going to read it, so I had to read it, and found that I really loved it. Let me see here, I need to go forward here. So it was published in 2016. As I said, it's 462 pages. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 2 years and was named one of the best books of 2016 by the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the San Francisco Chronicle, and NPR. That's pretty good creds there. Okay, now the quote I really loved from this. How many of you have read The Gentleman in Moscow? Okay, so you remember he gets moved from his fancy suite up to this small garret room. And he mentions that there's a dormer window, but it accommodated a window the size of a chessboard. That's on page 11. On page 16, the window was only the size of a dinner invitation. And on page 18, he opened the window, though it was only the size of a postage stamp. So you can just feel getting claustrophobic in this room, but he didn't say he's getting claustrophobic. He describes several pages apart the size of this window, and I just love that. So that's sort of my experiences from the past with Amor Toll. So then we came up with Lincoln Highway. Would I want to talk about Lincoln Highway? Well, sure, because it's by Toll. But it was so big, and I just had a hard time getting going on it. Diane kept saying, have you read it yet? Have you read it yet? Because we had agreed to talk on it together. I said, no, but I'm taking a trip to New Mexico, and I'll read it on my trip. And I got quite a ways through it, not quite finished, but I did. Once I started it, it was just like, it just flows, to me at least, from one small chapter. I like the smallness of the chapters and how the points of view. Sometimes I don't like it when there are a lot of different points of view, but in this one I really liked it. Was that your experience too? Did you like the different changing points of view?
Yeah.
I see some heads nodding.
It worked well.
Okay. So I really got into this one too. One of the things that I enjoyed, and Diane was talking about how his method. In an interview, somebody asked him, why do you do that? Why do you change characters and locations and lengths of time? And he says, the reason I make a shift like this is because it forces me to retool almost every element of my craft. By changing the setting, the era, and the cast of characters, I also must change the narrative's perspective, tone, and poetics so that they will be true to these people in this situation at this moment in time. Similarly, by changing the duration of the tale from a year to 30 years to 10 days, the structure, the pacing, and scope of the thematic discovery all have to change. So I love that he sets himself a challenge by changing things up instead of churning out another formula book. Now, I do think John Grisham writes some good books, and he's done some different ones too, like Playing for Pizza in Italy, different kind of book. But he wrote a book about baseball. He wrote The Painted House. But a lot of his first ones especially were kind of formula. You get, it's a lawyer, and the story is exciting, but it still seemed like sort of a formula. Whereas Toll's is doing something different, and he's not just churning them out. Okay, so now we're going to come, I'm sorry?
No, I'm talking to myself, I'm sorry.
So now we're going to come to the book we're going to really talk about today, and Mitch is going to give us some background on the setting.
First, I have some advice for Elaine. Get a Kindle. Books are hard to handle. Well, Elaine asked me to do a couple of little things having to do with the book. One, she knew how much time I've spent in prisons. So this, even though it's just a work farm, everybody's read it, right? Or
Yes.
most of it, except we're going to spoil it for somebody here. But anyway, the work farm in Salina, Kansas, I think from what I've looked at, really doesn't exist. I tried to find something similar on Google, but couldn't find anything that fit exactly. But it looked like to me, and I'm not a criminologist. I have spent a lot of time around criminals, but I'm not an expert. But as Klaus likes to say, I did spend last night at Holiday Inn. So that lends some authority, some expertise that That's as good as it gets. So this place was not high security, and obviously they could sneak out and get to the movies, or if they didn't get caught. But it didn't appear that they had any guard towers with pistol backers that would shoot escapees. So, and it seemed like from what I saw, considering their ages, Wooly, Duchess, and Emmett, and what they were convicted of doing, the length of sentences and their surroundings and just being placed in that environment seemed about right. Might be a little more harsh in some other areas, but Middle America, I think they did the right thing in those sentencings. So 3 hours approximately from the work farm to Morgan, Nebraska. Is it that right? Morgan, whatever. Morgan? I don't know how to pronounce that Nebraska town, but the 3-hour drive and having the warden bring Emmett back home, the reality probably is that wouldn't happen. But the author did need a vehicle to get Duchess and Wooly up to Nebraska. Vehicle. The trunk, I can see them sneaking into the trunk of the warden's vehicle. Getting out of it would be another matter. If you notice, the trunks in sedans these days, since 2002, have required to have a latch. If you have a sedan, and most every one of you has an SUV, and they don't need them because you can climb over the back seat. But in a trunk, lots of people got killed or died, suffocated, kids playing hide and seek. That's a great place until you can't get out. But nowadays, there's a little glow-in-the-dark latch. If you have a sedan, every one of them nowadays has a way to get out. Back then, not so much. Maybe they were able to, but it would have taken some work. Wouldn't have been easy. Let me see here. That's enough about that. Let me talk about Studebakers for just a minute. Anybody ever own a Studebaker in here? Good for you. What was it, Klaus? Was it a roadster, a convertible, a dragster?
Kind of like that one.
Did it have the suicide doors of the? You know what suicide doors? The back doors open front. The front doors open. Yeah, those are called suicide doors. Fern knows that. I thought I was a car guy until yesterday's luncheon, and now I know that Fern is the car person. So, in 1948, that car would have sold for about between $2,000 and $2,200. But it was a little upscale from Fords and Chevys. Maybe, according to one Google thing I looked at, would have been maybe $600 to $800 more than the standard model that would have been comparable to the Studebaker. It was a 6-cylinder, 94 horsepower. 35,000 were built by the Studebaker factory. And Studebaker, some people, the old guys said, Studebaker made the mistake of not putting tongues on them. Anybody know what that meant? Studebaker in the 1850s was the most prominent. 1850. They made schooners, wagons, covered wagons. They made covered wagons. The tongue is what goes out front that you attach the horses. So Studebaker was big then, never got bigger. I mean, in terms of popularity with the population. So let's see here. Emmett, you remember what Emmett said about? Duchess said about Emmett where the other guys had pictures of Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah, car.
Car. So, Duchess also said, and I don't have quotes like you have, but paraphrasing, Duchess said that Studebaker would be something that the dentist's wife would drive to a grocery store. Not exactly elegant, but, and my guess is that Emmett probably, he saved up his money from his carpentry work. I'm guessing he spent somewhere in the range of $500 to $700 for a 4 or 5 year old Studebaker in he would have bought it in '52, I would think, since he was in the work farm until '54. So, Studebaker made electric cars before it was popular. 1902. In 1904 were their gas vehicles, and they were never in the running for the most popular, and pretty much were on the severe decline in the 1950s. Packard bought them for a little while, and then eventually Studebaker went out of business in the early 60s. Their last vehicle was kind of popular. It was the Avante, a sports car. It was, I think, built in Ontario, Canada, but didn't make it either. So that's it for the Studebakers.
Thank you. I forgot to tell you the quote that I liked from, or the phrase I liked from Lincoln Highway. You know, the little town that they were from, it's mentioned that it was President Streets going one way, right, and names of trees going the other.
Right.
And when Duchess starts following the person he calls the cowboy, who had been egging on the guy that hit Emmett, he says, he crossed a president and walked up a tree. And I thought, oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. We really, in the book, we really don't spend a lot of time on the Lincoln Highway. But I am going to just mention that it was the first transcontinental road for automobiles in the United States. It opened and was dedicated in 1913. And it winds its way over 3,000 miles between New York City and San Francisco. And I put up here beside it, this shows the roads that it kind of follows now. Highway 30 and a little bit on 40 and 50. So it's still out there, sort of like Route 66 is, kind of over to the side, and it's there in pieces, I guess we'll say. Of course, to use a highway, you need a car and enough money for gas and maintenance to keep the car going. And Mitch has talked a little bit about the costs of cars, but talking about the value of a car kind of puts it in perspective what a big theft this was when Duchess took Emmett's car. I thought, well, that's like cattle rustling, from 100 years ago, and that was a crime that could get somebody killed, right? So this was really kind of a big deal when he did this. And then he not only took it, but he gave it away to a young thug in New York. So he was just really something. Now he's called the engine of the book, Duchess. Who enjoyed reading his parts the most? No? I kind of did. I thought he was kind of fun, but I also got very put out with him.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
Speaking about trying to find things about this book, there are no ends of quotes and opinions from interviews available. In fact, we could have done a whole lecture looking at the ways that Tolles uses influences from famous heroes' journeys, including the Iliad, the Odyssey, Hamlet, and Huckleberry Finn. We had some discussion about that, but I decided we didn't have time for that today. So I left all that out. But that's interesting, too, if you want to look into it. There was a quote that based on Diane's recommendation, I started reading this book last week, The Ride of Her Life. It also starts in 1954, and it's about a woman in her 60s who rides across the country on a horse. Yes, on a horse. And it's by Elizabeth Letts, and she puts a lot of historical information in too. And she has quotes from various people. And one of the quotes about life, about travel, about moving around, says, map out your future, but do it in pencil. The road ahead is as long as you make it worth the trip. So I thought that was pretty apropos. Here's some more of the postcards. You didn't mention this, but he actually got some historical postcards that he then used to make them be the places where the mother stopped when she left the home and went to California. And this is actually him, I guess he took a selfie or he found somebody to take his picture when he was doing that road trip, which you did mention about him doing on the Lincoln Highway. So our five main characters, well, Sally really wasn't in it as much. We really have four main characters, but she was in it a fair bit. And she's in it from beginning to end because we see her very early on and then she is with them at the end. So even though she wasn't there much in the middle, she was there. So here's a little description of each one. Emmett is a young man of strong morals and integrity. Billy is both wise beyond his years and naive of the world. Duchess has developed his own brand of morality. Woolley attempts to please others and avoid conflict. Sally cares about Emmett and Billy, but wants her own fresh start. So now we're going to start on some questions about this book. How might each of the boys' lives have been different if they'd been born into the present rather than the past? Any thoughts on that?
Cell phones would have essentially eliminated the need for most of the plot.
You know, my husband said that about the Civil War. Yes, ma'am.
I got the feeling that Billy may have been autistic. If he was, he would have had more help, well, he would have had help today to learn how to deal with that, and so would his brother.
Did you feel like Billy needed help?
Yes.
And give me an example of what you were thinking of when you thought about him needing help.
Well, Emmett did his best, but Billy needed more support to open up. You know, the way he clung to things, the way he was able to articulate that this was this, and his memory was absolutely, it wasn't. I've got a 10-year-old grandson who his school says is very, very bright, and he is, but he was nothing like Emmett, like Billy. He was nothing like Billy. Yes, he can remember facts, but Billy's capacity to remember stuff and to say this is the way, like for his mother, he worked out exactly where his mother had been, and in his own mind she was leaving a trail. Well, was she?
Well, that is one of the questions, and I think one of the situations that might also fit in with what you're saying is, remember when he gets into several times when he's being threatened, he just closes his eyes and says over and over again, Emmett, 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 Emmett.
Yeah.
So that's probably fits with what you're saying too. What about
Let me interject. Klaus would have been exactly Billy's age in 1954. So were you as precocious?
Yes.
There would have been better drugs
That's
if he
exactly.
had autism now
Yes.
than there were then.
Right.
Well, was that for Wooly?
Well, yeah, Wooly
Or
really
Billy
needed,
or
Yeah.
Bill.
Wooly really needed some help too.
Yeah.
So there should have been more
Much more.
help for Wooly in these days.
You would think that the justice system would have treated them differently if it were today. But exactly how, I guess, would depend to some degree on where they were.
Yeah.
And how rich their families were.
Whose justice system? Yeah, that too. What kind of legal help they might have. But it would have been either less complicated or a whole lot more complicated had it been today if they had committed the same transgression.
I think Emmett really grew up faster than most 18-year-olds today.
Yeah.
But there was no safety net, there were, relatively speaking. The young people who didn't have a family to take care of them were more on their own.
What about that second question? I see Marcia Schultz shaking her head, and that's kind of my immediate reaction too, but I guess it's mixed. I mean, we could think of probably pros and cons on both sides, but
I think there's more availability now. You know, I'm thinking about my grandkids and the fact that somebody was there to handle an issue, you know, like at the school, they had a counselor and whatever that could take care of stuff, refer them, and so on. But, you know, I think there are still the same problems that kids have growing up, you know, as they always have. But I think there's a lot more safety nets than there used to be.
but there's also an epidemic of suicide in young people,
Yeah, sure.
which seems to speak to the, I don't know, the pace of our life or something, some of the stresses they have nowadays.
It seems like they were more mature 70 years ago. I think they matured faster in the respect that they were much more self-reliant, thank you. They really were much more self-reliant, not as, you know, the children weren't coddled as much and hovered over by parents. And so it didn't surprise me that they could do what they did in that time period. You know, just go off on their own and survive.
I don't think they saw themselves as victims as much as kids might today.
Exactly.
And you know, thinking about these kids, the one that would be the closest to the upbringing that Toles had was probably Wooly. As far as, it said he had a middle-class life, but it was a middle-class life that included private schools and Yale and Stanford. So, that not everybody would consider that a middle-class life.
And going back to Emmett, he was so much more mature for his age, way above his years, because when he knew not to fight, when he had the accidentally killed Jimmy, he knew not to even argue because he knew they were all against him. So he knew, what's the point? And the same thing when Jacob, his brother, came back to beat him up. He just let him have it because he felt that he needed to get that stress or that anger out. And he didn't fight back. And he didn't press charges or anything. It wasn't worth it.
But do you not think years ago the morality was it's either right or it's wrong? Now we have so many grey areas, and I saw Emmett when he stood and let that boy beat him. Wasn't so much he was saying, let him get it out. It was saying, I did wrong. He still felt that he did wrong because that was it. It was either right or it was wrong, because morality then was so black and white. There was nothing in the middle.
Did you have something, Diane? You wanted to say?
No.
What about this question? And 10 days. Isn't it amazing that that all took place in 10 days? You know, I was nearly to the end of the book that I realized it was counting backwards, saying 10, 9.
Yeah.
I was about to 2 before I realized they were all backwards. I mean, who changed the most besides being dead, you know? Yeah, there is that. So really, to me, came down to Emmett and Belly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, of all those characters, I think the one who changed the most was Sally.
Oh.
Sally,
Yeah, I think we forget about Sally.
She was a very important.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's the one that just said, I'm done with this, I'm out of here, I'm on my own, and I'm not fixing dinner, doing laundry for anybody else. I thought she probably made the biggest personality transformation.
Yeah, she was sort of the beginning of the women's movement.
Yes, she was.
Yeah, she was.
And her, right, and what Emmett was planning to do is more acceptable for him than what she decided to do, or was trying to do. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
I guess
I'll take that.
the character that surprised me the most, and I don't know if this falls in the category of change, but I kept seeing this story not through the lens of Huckleberry Finn, but the Odyssey. And Duchess, to me, embodied a lot of the character of Odysseus, who was not a very nice man.
But I thought the things that happened to Emmett were the things that kind of seemed like things that happened to Odysseus.
Well, I mean, they all traveled about, but Odysseus was not an ethical and moral actor. He was not. He was a trickster. He was wily. In fact, I think wily is a word, if you look in Greek drama and poetry, there are usually iconic characters like that have, there are adjectives that just attach to them. And one of them that attaches to Odysseus, I believe, is wily. And he is. He is not a nice person. And he is not, trustworthy isn't exactly the word, but he's not, he's very determined to get what he wants. That the Odysseus.
Well, that
character-
describes Duchess for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I was surprised that he died in the end. I did not see that coming.
I didn't
Well-
see that coming either.
Well, we're going to get to the end because the end is, I mean, they're talking all about it, all over the internet. I even decided that, you know, the beginning of the Odyssey is really from the Iliad. Spill over from the Iliad. And what happens in the Iliad is the Trojan horse. I decided those boys getting in the car and then popping out at Emma's house was like the Trojan horse.
Could be, could be. I mean,
So-
it's hard, you don't want to try to take a parallel too far because it
Yeah.
doesn't work. But it was, but
And that might be too far.
But I thought Duchess was the most Odysseus-like character, which, as I say, is why I was so surprised that he dies in the end.
I didn't think Emmett changed much until the last day. Speaking of the end,
Yeah.
he did things on the last day that I wouldn't have expected him to do.
Well, there were a few places where, like, he was trying to find his way on the subway and he decided he didn't want to be like his father who wouldn't ask for help, and he asked for help. You know, there were a few little things along there, but yeah.
New York City subway can be pretty imposing.
But he did finally decide to take charge right there at the end, which he had seemed to be sort of being pushed around. Yeah. Okay. Every character in this novel has a dream. Some are big and some are simple, but all the hopes and dreams have collateral consequences. Whose dreams do you think had the biggest impact on the rest of the characters? And you've probably already answered that question, Jane.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, well, you said it, Duchess is the engine that moves the story forward.
Or yeah, never would have all happened.
Right.
Duchess and his sidekick had stolen away in the Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah. Duchess, oh, what a character. So yeah, I think, and he was out to get his dreams. No, he was good. And what was his dream? He had a couple of dreams. What were his dreams?
Duchess.
Yeah, Duchess.
I think he wanted to get back. He was after his father at that point. He wanted revenge for what happened to him. I think he was on his way to find his father still. I mean, that was the next step.
And he took care of a few others along the way while he was at it. And then the money. I think Willie told him about the money and he wanted to get the money. So to me, those were his two. He wanted to, in his opinion, even the books with the revenge, and then he wanted to get that money. And he did not care about anybody else's plans or dreams or whatever. And we talked a little bit about Billy and his personality, but since he's the youngest and least experienced, how is it that he has such a big influence?
I think the others were impressed by his innocence and his naivety in that everything was going to be okay. You just did this and it would work. You did that and it would work. You know, you didn't make friends with somebody unless you'd known them for 3 days. I always loved it.
That was an interesting exchange between him and Emmett. Well, you think about how Emmett had his plan made. He was going to come to Texas. And Billy just kind of chips away at him till he changes the direction to California. And there's several other things. I mean, I don't know, how did Billy get those guys to go up into the Empire State Building to look for the professor with him?
Yeah, that
He
was
was so
interesting
pure
with
a
that book.
character, nobody wanted to disappoint him.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing with the book, it was like he had all this knowledge, this young kid, and he could just pull out quotes and knew all this information, and the others were just astonished that he knew all this, and they trusted what he said. This little kid, that was really surprising.
So his knowledge, his persistence, made that some of the pieces.
He had quite a bit of insight into things in a naive sort of way, which I think got their attention too, and helped him persuade them to do things that he wanted.
The big black guy that he met,
Ulysses.
Ulysses, yeah, and he convinced him just by talking to him that his life wasn't worthless, that he could go back and he could start making something of himself. And it was wonderful the way that guy took him under his wing, because Billy could have ended up in goodness knows where if it hadn't been for somebody like Ulysses.
Ulysses took, or Emmett took quite a scolding from Ulysses.
He did.
And okay.
Okay, so we've got our four main characters. We've got our four main characters, and we've just mentioned one of the supporting characters. So who would you like to have a novel about? Sally. Yeah. And the other one for me would be Ulysses, actually.
Right.
Anybody else?
I think Sally will be back. He'll be writing about Sally in the future.
We talked about the preacher a little bit and decided we wouldn't want to hear. We
No,
weren't interested in a novel with him.
What about the grandmother? Sally being.
Sally, yeah, Amor talks about his grandmother who was from the Midwest, and he said Sally was just like his grandmother. And he said, I'm really intrigued because she was tough, she was practical, she made bread and preserves and all this, and, you know, just knew how to live in tough times. So he even said himself, he said, I'm really intrigued by Sally. Like, he didn't really know himself where Sally was going to go, but I think Sally will be back in one of his, maybe she'll go to Egypt.
When did you say that book starts?
He said it will be 1940 in Cairo to 1999. He's so exact with his time period in New York City.
I quite like to.
Did Gentlemen of Moscow have a really strong, very secondary female character in it?
Well, it had the young girl, for sure.
But then there was
Grows up.
earlier in the novel.
And then later,
Earlier
That
in
was
the
her
novel.
mother, yeah, Nina's mother.
Yes.
And then,
Maybe it's her mother, or wasn't there a love interest earlier in the novel?
oh yes, she was an actress, I believe.
Yeah, it just seemed like there was, and that seemed like kind of a theme of a very strong woman who's not at the center.
Well, he had a strong grandmother, the gentleman at Moscow did, near the beginning. But you only hear a little bit about her, because he helps her get on a train and leave to get away from Russia.
No, I'm not thinking of her, but it seemed like there was a woman,
He had some kind of an affair going on with somebody, so I guess that's
there
what
was
it
somebody who was kind of a,
And then didn't he go and meet somebody at the end?
He had an affair with that person who
She
was
was there throughout his.
rumored to have an affair with something Russian.
She was
Is
always
anybody
there.
interested to know why Emmett's mother left and what caused her to leave? Emmett thinks he knows, but he doesn't, and we don't know why she left or what she did with her life when she did leave.
Well, she was very depressed. You know, there was talk about that. And I knew Emmett knew that she was very depressed. And then all of a sudden, she got all excited when they all went to the fireworks.
Exactly.
And then the next day she left. So I don't know if that was a piece of.
We decided it was, in our talking about the depression and then the disappointment with her life and the husband that couldn't make it work.
But doesn't anyone want to know what happened to her?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, and there were questions about her in some of these questions. I ended up leaving those out because, you know, I don't know how we answer them. I mean, we don't, you know, she never had, she sent those postcards, which were hidden by the father. They came out later, but there was no other letter. Had she not, you know, sent anything else? If the father had saved postcards, wouldn't he have saved a letter if it came in, you know?
That's why I'd
We
like
just-
to know.
We just don't know. You just don't know.
yeah, until they left Nebraska, I kept thinking her body was gonna turn.
Yes, I did.
But that would have made it a very different book.
Yeah, there were a few bodies, but not hers.
You know, one of the other things about the book that is really, in a way it's misleading, but the Lincoln Highway is really an aspirational idea, because even most of the distance that they actually travel on that route, they're on a train.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, I said, well,
They're
we
not,
weren't
they're
we
not
weren't
in
really
a
on
car,
the
not the
highway.
way- at least the two boys aren't. Now, the other two presumably were, but Emmett and Billy are not. And,
But they're about to get on.
it's what they're looking forward to. It's not something that's actually, it's a character in the book, but it is not a character in the book because they actually travel on it, because they don't really. You don't.
It's not like the Metropole Hotel.
No, it's not like the Metropole Hotel.
is in the other. Now here we're looking, this does say besides the boy's mother. So there was a question before that was about the mother, which I ended up leaving out. But we're looking at Sally again. So they're saying, what do you make of the relationship between Emmett and Sally? And what do you think happens to Sally after the novel?
Well, I think Sally started out that she was really interested in Emmett as a husband. And I think she realized that, I don't know if she realized that that wasn't going to happen, or if by the end of it, she was tired of taking care of him as she was tired of taking care of her dad. And she just wanted to be off on her own and more or less considered him as a friend.
You know, the one thing she asked him to do, besides take Billy up there when she refuses to take him back, was call me at such and such a time on such and such a day. Mm-hmm. And does he do it? Now, of course, he didn't have a cell phone, but calls were only a dime then, right?
Well, we've been a long distance call, and that would have been.
Oh, that's true. That's true. And those long distance calls were expensive, weren't they?
Yes.
Woo. Anybody have anything more to say about that?
Yes, I
Okay.
think Sally started a book club somewhere.
Maybe so, but I'm thinking she did okay, one way or another.
But he couldn't have called her because he didn't have any money, remember? His money was already stolen at that time.
You know, she had to go pick him up again.
Well, I think he forgot about it, to be honest. But
Yeah, it does not get mentioned. It's not like he's thinking, oh, I have to call Sally. He does not think about that, at least not that we know of.
I don't know if this is when he was asleep in that prostitute's room or not, but that was one of the byways that Duchess took him off of, getting off of his robe. Okay, the end. What do we think about the end? Now, Linda Bono already talked to me, and she told me Emmett just couldn't have done that. That just was.
Well, that's what I was thinking. It didn't seem like his character.
It didn't seem like it was, I agree, it didn't seem like it was in character.
It was out of character for Emmett to do such a thing.
Yeah, for those of us who have a short memory and read the book over a year ago, would you just hit the high points of what happened at the end? Because as you're talking about these things, some of it is coming back to me, but I can't remember.
Duchess and Wooly, in Wooly's car, get to this home in the Adirondacks.
Right, the hunting lodge.
The hunting lodge by the lake. They go into the study where the money is supposed to be in the safe. They pull the picture away from in front of the safe, and Duchess says, "So what's the combination?" Well, you know, Wooly. He's like, duh. So Duchess is trying to figure out a way to break into the safe, though Billy observes if it was easy to break into, it wouldn't be a safe. And so in the meantime, Wooly goes up and takes something to finish himself off, which Duchess comes up and sees this is going on. He doesn't call for help. He just leaves the radio playing and goes back downstairs again. So by the time Emmett gets there, he finds Wooly dead.
Right.
He goes down where Duchess is still trying to get into the safe. And Duchess turns and he's like, "Oh, great, I'm glad you're here." No mention of Wooly, you know, and Emmett is just, he gets so angry at Duchess's attitude towards Wooly and to the fact that his car was stolen and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the things. Sally has shown up again too.
Well,
She came because he didn't call her.
Sally is with Emmett and Billy.
And
They drop her off at a motel. her truck broke down, so she has to take the rest of the trip with.
Billy is supposed to stay at the hotel with her.
And then
He's
Billy
going, and
sneaks
he
into the
climbs
car.
out of the window,
Right.
and he,
That's right.
man, he gets in the trunk again.
He gets in the
That trunk. So Emmett and Billy are back at the lodge, except Emmett doesn't know Billy's there,
Right, right.
and Duchess doesn't know Billy's there. Billy goes in, and they're both, Duchess and Emmett get into a fight, because Emmett tells Duchess, we're going to the police. And Duchess says, why would I go to the police? And at some point, Duchess gets a gun out, and he points it at Emmett.
A rifle. A rifle, yeah. Long gun.
Billy then shows up, shows himself, though he's been in there, and he figured out the combination just by trying different dates that he knows would have been important to them based on the stories Wooly had told him. And he manages, after about 6 tries, to get it, and it was, anybody remember?
The date of the Gettysburg Address.
The date of the Gettysburg Address. Who would know that date?
Billy would know.
Billy also knows that Duchess can't shoot.
Duchess can't shoot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, so he comes, and Emmett's attention gets pulled away because he sees Billy. Duchess realizes Emmett's looking, so he turns, sees Billy. He points the gun at Billy. But Billy's not afraid of the gun because he realizes that Duchess cannot read because of several things he said through the book. And there are rules in the house, there are house rules listed, that the guns are all to be unloaded for the end of the season. Anyway, they end up with a fight. Emmett gets hit, Duchess gets hit, Duchess is unconscious. They go find the money, they divide up the money, at $50,000 to Billy, $50,000 to Emmett, $50,000 to Duchess. They don't want Duchess messing up plans. They put him in a boat that has a hole in it. But, and Wooly can't swim. I mean, Wooly's gone, he's dead. Duchess can't swim. But what else does Emmett do to the boat?
Stones in the bed.
He put stones down on the end away from the hole so that it would hold the boat up. Now, so to me, that says he wasn't necessarily trying to kill him.
Wasn't the money at the other end where
They put the money on the other end.
Well, yeah, but if he could just be patient.
Duchess.
See, it doesn't make sense. So, but he was done with Duchess messing up his life. And he needed to get away with his car that is now yellow instead of blue. Anyway, does that tell you enough information?
Yeah.
And then, but then Duchess does move around in the boat when he wakes up. The water comes in. He's in the water.
Did we
kinda has
know before the scene with the boat that Duchess could not swim?
Yes.
We did know that.
Yes.
So Emma
From
would have known
reform
that.
school.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Billy knew it, and Billy told him
Goes to the
it.
movies.
Billy was the one that knew it.
But does Emmett know
Yeah, he knows.
Well,
that.
Billy tells him it.
it? Okay, because I don't think Billy was involved with the stuff with the boat. I think Emmett tells him to get in the car, and Emmett does that all himself.
Right.
Yes.
Which seems,
Does not.
and
know.
I did
That's
not
true.
have as sunny, I mean, I think he did it to keep Duchess from coming after them.
Right.
But I also think there was a more sinister side to that. You don't know. You just don't know, because he doesn't, you never hear his thinking about it.
Yes, because of where he's placed the money.
Yeah.
That's the sinister side.
Yeah,
He
I
knows
thought that was,
that Duchess is mad for money.
Uh-huh.
So what will you do? You'll go and grab the money.
and then the boat was.
Okay, when it turns out that there was no bullet in the gun, which he had pointed first at Emmett and then at Billy, he said, oh, I wouldn't have shot it. Do Do you believe that?
No.
I don't either. So, there's retribution due for somebody who kills people. I think it was sort of like an ending that had to happen.
Yeah, when you look at it, yeah.
He would have continued to follow them and try to find them.
Right, yeah.
He probably wanted all of them.
Yeah.
If he could have gotten all of it, he probably would have, yeah.
Well, you know, the other thing, I don't remember, was there an explanation earlier in the book of why Duchess's name was misspelled? All the way through, it's misspelled.
I don't remember anything related to that.
And I think it's because, and then when we find out at the very end that he can't read, I'm suddenly going, that's why his name is misspelled.
Well, he would not have wanted it spelled as Duchess, because his father called him that, and it was embarrassing, the little girl. So he said he was named after Dutchess County, which would have been correct.
Oh, okay. I thought
That was how
that
he
it was
explained the
name.
name, but the old friend of the father's explained that it was because the mother would keep his curls long, dress him in the pretty dresses and things, and he would go looking for his father in the bar, and he would say, oh, here's the Duchess.
Now, there are a lot of things that could be discussed here, talking about each one of them had a mother figure that wasn't very helpful and a father, you know, what their fathers were like. We haven't even really talked about that, but that's more than we can get done.
I did not, as you well know, because we talked about it, like the ending. So much so, Diana knows this too, that it colored the whole book for me. That I just remember, I read it when it first came out as a book that I did not like as much as I loved his writing style. Amor Tolson had loved The Gentleman in Moscow. I got the book, had it for a long time, and couldn't make myself read it for this book discussion when you said, but after we talked, I said, yes, I'm going to make sure I read it, and I very much appreciated the book. I didn't have as much trouble with the end the second time, but I still was troubled by the ending. I thought that Tolles just didn't, this was me, no other reviewers agree with this, but he didn't know what to do with this end, and that's not his style of writing, as you said, he's got it all figured out. Because if Duchess stayed alive, their lives would never be what they wanted them to be. He'd always be there, so we've got to get rid of Duchess. But for Emmett's character to change so radically at that one point where he hits him with the rifle, he comes back, he's waking up, and he hits him again and sends Billy away. They clean up everything so that there's no evidence that they've been there, and puts him in that boat where...
As part of that same little part of the book, though, Billy talks again about Emmett's temper, too.
His temper, the promise not to count to 10.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I felt like Duchess had coming, and I felt like it was almost, almost had to happen that he got some kind of karma for what he'd done.
But then he leaves Emmett with all the guilt of having been responsible for that. And would the police, if you really think about what all's going to happen, would the police, when they get there, maybe continue to go after because they knew they were together, and the fact that Woolley left the money to them, and they've got the will, but it wasn't really his money to leave.
The will was just on a little piece of paper that was in the kitchen that might have gotten lost. I mean, who's to say that they should have gotten that money?
And would Dennis have ever accepted this? Because he didn't think that Woolley was responsible enough to have the money, so he couldn't leave this whole situation behind. It seemed like he made it just as bad.
Well, I'm thinking it's 1954. We do not have an internet. We do not have the police departments all hooked up together across the nation. Yeah, I think he'd get away. I think he could get away without being
I think
found.
they would just assume that Wooly and Emmett broke into the house and.
Wooly and Duchess.
And Duchess, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. And got into the safe, and that Wooly had known the combination, because nobody knows, other than Sally, that Billy and Emmett were ever at that house. They don't know that. No one saw them.
But the safe, they would still know they'd broken into it because he had damaged it so bad.
No, they would know that, but they would think it was those two boys. It was
Wooly.
Duchess and Wooly who broke into the house, took the money, that Wooly had committed suicide or Duchess had killed him, and then Duchess somehow or other
Disappeared.
dies in the boat.
But the Duchess hat and backpack are in the front seat of the car, the Cadillac,
Yes, that's true.
Willie's car. So they'll know something has happened somewhere, but I don't think they'll tie Emmett and Billy. So,
Maybe in another book.
so I guess the question, who felt like they were satisfied with? I was very shocked by it too. I was like, oh, whoa, I didn't see that coming. But I was satisfied. Was anybody else satisfied?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, so most people were not.
I took it as a slice of life that didn't need to have,
Not at first,
just
but
a
then when
slice
you
of
think about
life
it,
without the need for a satisfying ending.
Uh-huh. Right,
Leave it be.
yeah.
Remember where this story is. This story is in the middle. They talked about that,
Yes,
you know?
yes.
Billy talked about it in conjunction with that book he had, because there was a place for his adventure. And he's like, well, where shall I start it? It's supposed to be started in the middle. And of course, their life on the farm is before. Once they get to California, they'll have a new life. But what happened here was in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's that slice of life that we get. So, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Okay, I'm going to say just another little thing about the Lincoln Highway. And this book talks some about the Lincoln Highway. I really recommend this book. It's a fun read. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Actually, I haven't finished that book.
Oh, well,
I did read half of it.
okay.
And you know, interesting.
If you're going to talk, put the microphone.
She was Annie, and this is a true story. Annie, I've forgotten her last name, but she was given 2 years to live back in 1954 because she had a lung condition. They never say exactly what it is. So she decided to take off on a horse and, go to the Pacific Ocean from Maine. She ended up living another 28 years.
Oh my God.
She died when she was 88. So, maybe not 28.
So you're saying this is a true story then?
Oh, it is a true story.
This one is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's listed as it's listed in the bio, it's in the library has it, the public library has it in the biography section. But there's a lot of history in it too. It's very interesting. Okay, so there is a book, in fact there's more than one, but about the Lincoln Highway. And in narrative, they talk about the Lincoln Highway and some of the reviews and stuff as being a motif, which is a distinctive repeating feature or idea. Often helps develop other narrative aspects, such as theme or mood. In this book, the Lincoln Highway represents a new beginning, the path to a new life, and maybe even their mother for Emmett and Billy. We don't know. On the other hand, for Duchess and Wooly, it was their dead end. They traveled back the way they had been. They traveled back to their old place of their old life. Neither escaped their past enough to make the journey to a better life. Duchess and Wooly are left behind, victims of their own action. While Emmett and Billy go to Times Square to start their trip from the very beginning of the Lincoln Highway with their final destination, the very end of the Lincoln Highway in San Francisco. And there's one more quote that's actually from this book that I want to, I'm going to read it and also let you read it so that it goes in there. There is a time in every journey when a person is hit with the heavy brick of certainty that life isn't a game, that there is no swooping logical path to follow, that your choices or destiny or whatever other power you attribute life's turns to may lead you to a spot that has inescapable consequences. Consequences you may not like or think you deserve. Now, this author was saying this about this character, but I thought when I read that, that applies so much to Wooly and Duchess, and really all of them, Billy and Emmett. The consequences they're going to get are based on their choices that they made. So, thank you for attending. Does anybody have any last comment or okay?
Can I just throw a grenade in here?
A grenade? Oh dear, okay.
Does anyone feel like me that Duchess had his own morality? He went after people that had harmed him in the past and seriously harmed him. You know, I said that Billy would probably get help today. So would Duchess. I mean, he was abandoned when he was, what, 7 or 8 years of age. His father left him at a nunnery and said that it was somebody else's child.
Well, this is what I had said here about Duchess. He had developed, that to me, that was kind of the standout point of his personality. He has developed his own morality.
Yes.
And it doesn't fit
But
with
it
the
wasn't
rest
just always for himself. He went after that guy when he walked down President Street and up the tree because he'd beaten up on his friend.
Right, right.
I'm
anything. Let her talk.
curious, how many people here had heard of the Lincoln Highway? Before
Before you read the book, had you heard about the
People know
highway
about the
itself?
Lincoln Highway.
Okay, about half a dozen it looks like.
What's interesting, we're from Nebraska. So
you
I know a thing or two about the Lincoln Highway, right? And so this whole area where it starts, it's kind of like my old stomping grounds. Little factoid, in Seward, Nebraska, where they had the fireworks, that started in 1868, was the first year they had the fireworks.
Wow.
In Seward, Nebraska. My parents went every year. We went with my parents. I mean, so for me, and my dad, actually in 1939, when there was no work in Nebraska, he and some other boys from Nebraska went on the Lincoln Highway, went out west to find work and journaled it. So Lincoln, and the fact is, where we used to live in Elkhorn, Nebraska, they have preserved a portion of it. We've seen it. I mean, it's just in our DNA to know, and it's kind of like bricks. So this portion of the Lincoln Highway is bricked, and it's right there outside of Omaha, where you can actually, you can still go on it.
We've walked on it.
We've been on the Lincoln Highway. So for us, you know, this book was just, it was really special.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we lived in New York City, and I never knew that I was on the Lincoln Highway.
Oh, the original title of the book was Unfinished Business.
Diane?
I like this title.
Did you ever go on the Lincoln Highway in Times Square and know you were on it? Me neither.
And we're from New York. Yeah, we're from, I don't think it's labeled Lincoln Highway in New York City.
We never knew. But the Lincoln Tunnel, I remember.
The Lincoln
that.
Tunnel, yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't know why.
Yeah, right.
Well, it wasn't been
Well,
quite.
really, seriously, thanks for sharing that.
Well, yeah,
I love hearing
right,
that.
but not the Lincoln Highway.
What is the next book?
Well, the next book, it's going to be, after the first of the year, of course, but it's going to be 2 books, actually. It's 2 smaller books. The 1984 and Brave New World, right? Yeah.
Well, we don't have to say
Yes, that's, well, they're doing a classic every year, so that's the classic for the year. But I don't have a
Oh,
date.
yeah, we will.
Well, actually, we have made a date, but I don't know, I don't remember what it is. Well, you had made a date.
I made dates, but they're not connected to books, and they're not, and I have no idea when the presenters will present.
Right. We don't really have the details, but, so I don't know what order we're doing is what you're saying too, I guess.
I mean, that's up to you guys.
Right, okay. To be announced. A lot of us have probably read those books in the past, so if you don't want to reread them, find a good summer. But do you still want to read that book? You should go back and read
I think they were got the
Are these your
Just a suggestion. Years ago, one person
Yeah, well, it's kind of up to the, everyone is different.
That was just a piece of paper.
I'm at 5:30 tonight anyway.
We listened to
I'm not on that. Speaking of which,